Hello and welcome back to Washed Up Weekly. We are your hosts, Abby and Colin, and welcome back for episode 6.
We hope
So
everyone had a good Valentine's Day. How did yours go, Abby?
it was just a normal day for me. Um, I did a Pilates class. I ate dinner with my parents. They actually ended up staying home and cooking so that me and my sister could be included, and it was really nice. What about you?
Nice. Mine was also pretty uneventful. I'm honestly more excited about President's Day tomorrow and like being off of work, and I'm gonna go to Mount Vernon with some friends and maybe write a little Substack about that.
Yeah, I'm so excited that I do not have to work tomorrow. I also last week, I think we mentioned that Colin was getting over his sickness. I was down for the count the past like maybe 3.5-ish days, and I'm starting to feel better today, and I worked it off in some workout classes too, and I've trying to been sweating it out too.
Yeah, I did hear the flu is really bad right now. Like it's kind of peaking as of like this past week. And it's brutal out there. So everyone stay safe, wash your hands, do what you got to do because I was strung out for like at least 4 days and you said like 2, 3 days.
Yeah, I was not doing well. And when I'm not doing well, all I want to do is just rot on the couch, and that is simply what I did.
Yeah, so we got some interesting news from the Vista last week. They said they listened to our pod as they were doing their production day, so that was really cool to hear. And just wanted to give them a quick shout out because they're starting up their production again for this spring semester. And so, hello to everyone out there. We are definitely inspired by all of the work that you guys do. We know how hard that you work. So, if we can provide just a little bit of entertainment for you all, and you guys, if you're our main audience as of right now, that's awesome. And we will do our best to give you the best information that we can.
I know Colin texted me and said that the current editor-in-chief texted him that they listened to it during a production day, and it just warmed my little heart. So cute. I am really excited for when we feel comfortable and confident enough to send it to our advisor as well. I can only imagine what she'll say about it.
Yeah, her background's in broadcast, so I feel like she'll have some things to say. She'll have some notes for us, I can imagine, about presentation and all of this.
I
Um,
could seriously imagine her just yelling at me, being like, Abby, you're saying like too much, or like, oh my God, I just did it. You know what I'm saying, Colin? You know, or like,
yeah. I feel like I've had to, well, over the course of like working at the Vista, I kind of internalized her a little bit so that she was in my head and I could just like listen to the internal version and know like what to do in different situations. So that voice still kind of exists in the back of my head whenever we're like recording or going over a story, you know. It's like it's good. It's kind of like a conscience a little bit.
I also live with that a little bit in my head when I'm specifically reporting on news or doing this. This is definitely closer to broadcast than print was too, and like you said, it was her specialty, so I could only imagine that she'd have so many comments for us.
Well, yeah, I hope we're doing her proud out here as well as everyone at the Vista. So shout out to you guys. And also that brought up something that I wanted to talk about in the course of, getting more into this and washed up and all of this. I've had to, read the news pretty closely as we're reporting on all these different news stories and commenting on it. And I've noticed that a lot of the outlets that are like met legacy, big name outlets, they have a lot of anonymous sources, which I just think is really odd because in our time at the Vista, we really never did anonymous sources. I can think of one time in 3 years that we did use an anonymous source. But we always were told like it's a complete non-starter. Like if they want to be anonymous, you're gonna have to figure out a way to like get their name on the record, or else just pass on the story because it's so I don't know. I just don't think it's like the same standard of reporting if you're relying so heavily on anonymous sources.
Right? Our advisor totally would have had our heads on a stick if we used anonymous sources nearly as much as legacy news sources do. Seriously, I also agree with you, Colin. I do see more and more anonymous sources, and it's so weird because I've we've always been taught that it's not a part of journalistic standards unless it is an issue like maybe sexual assault or harassment, and even then the sources have to be corroborated.
Yeah, I mean, our standard was pretty much like the only time we would use it is if someone's job was at risk if they went on the record or like they were in imminent risk of harm
Sure.
somehow.
Yeah.
And that was the only like that was our standard. And as we said, like there was only one story where we thought that it met that standard. It was someone who worked at a company and was pretty high up, and they were just talking about like some of the work that they do behind the scenes. So we thought like, okay, we know who they are, like we know their name. They're talking to us for like a very specific reason, and only they can really speak to it. So that was the one time that we ever used it. But I just think like there's such a trend. I feel like every single news story I read nowadays, it's like we spoke or so and so who spoke to us under the condition of anonymity. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't know. In some ways, I really trust like our col. I still read our college's newspaper because I think that the work that they do just is a higher standard in that specific way. And it's nice to know like exactly who the sources are when you're reading.
And I would say that about a lot of collegiate newsrooms as well. Colin and I would both have had opportunities in which we were able to go to collegiate journalism conferences. And in my experience, I remember talking to a few different editors and editor-in-chiefs of newsrooms, and for the most part, most people would say, yeah, we aren't allowed to use anonymous sources, or yeah, we have to do that deep investigative work and get somebody on the record in order to publish a story, especially an internal USD story or LMU story or whatnot. So
Yeah.
where does that go wrong from college? Because everyone obviously
Well,
goes to
I
school, so I
think
don't know where the line goes.
part of what I've been discerning from living in DC for a couple months now is like everyone knows each other. So like the people in government know the people in media, and they kind of like are all of the same like milieu, you could say. And so a lot of times, like in order to maintain their sources and their relationships, like I think they just got to work with what they have, and they don't want to like burn a bridge or something, even though technically like you could get someone on like you could get someone on the record who wants to be anonymous, but then you can like pivot and decide to use their name, but you're basically going to be burning a bridge if you do that. And so I think part of like the anonymous thing in the legacy media is just that they want to maintain those open channels with the people who they already have established connections with, and it's just easier to guarantee their source anonymity.
And I guess the issue is with that is the rest of the world or the rest of the country isn't in on that inner circle, right? So we
Yeah.
can't, as readers or viewers, automatically trust these sources, even if these journalists are trustworthy people and notable people, people who've been in the field for a while. I kind of have had experience with that within our little USD bubble. I was also a political science major, so a lot of the classes I had in my cohorts, I actually had with our ASG, and I remember we would like get
Student
together.
government,
What'd you say?
for student government, just
Yes,
for
our student government. And I remember before class, we would all be chit-chatting and stuff, and then somebody would mention something, and then they'd turn to me and be like, Abby, wait, that was off the record. And obviously, I don't want to burn a bridge there, so I completely understand that. But there would be some days when they would tell me a story and or an inside scoop and be like, but don't put me on record for it, but here is where you could possibly put somebody on record for it and give me kind of a lead there. So it's honestly a push and pull there. I get it, but I also don't.
yeah. Yeah, I just think the landscape is kind of changing, and I hope it changes away from relying on anonymous sourcing, just because I don't think it doesn't carry the same credibility. And honestly, that's why I will continue to read our college's newspaper because I know that they have really high standards there. I trust like their reporting, and you can verify a lot of the people who they're quoting as, students. So
Yes. Good job, guys. I hope you guys are watching this Tuesday.
yeah. And so on that note, do you want to go to our first news topic this week?
Yes. What is our first topic, Colin?
We're going to be talking about NATO and Ukraine and just kind of where the US stands in relation to that right now. There was a pretty big development. Obviously, Russia and Ukraine have been at war for about going on 3 years at this point. And the US has been backing Ukraine pretty heavily with in terms of aid and in the rhetoric and all of this. And then obviously Trump came in. Hegseth is head of the Department of Defense now, and he gave I think, like press conference last week saying that he thought that some of the expectations that it would take to end this war are a little bit unrealistic. He said that we can't expect the territorial boundaries to go back to how they were pre-war,
Mhm.
pre-2014
2014.
specifically.
Yeah.
And also, he thought it was unrealistic to expect that that Ukraine should be allowed into NATO.
Yes. Okay. Here are my thoughts on this. I think that obviously ending the war is a positive goal. I actually remember being in our advisor's media class, like literally our sophomore year of college, and reporting on this. But I'm hesitant to trust the process in terms of the negotiation fully, just because if the peace is achieved at the risk of Ukraine losing its sovereignty and independence, I'm not sure that would be a win. I think that would be more so leaning towards an authoritarianistic circle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like we can't. I think the argument is like we can't allow a sovereign nation to be invaded and just kind of turn our heads. And historically, the US has played a big role in kind of like post World War II policing the world and making sure that those types of things aren't happening. Um, but I'd say there's been a pretty big shift in terms of the US's foreign policy with Trump now, and this sort of more isolationist stance of like part of Make America Great Again is more of like an isolationist platform,
Yeah.
where they don't want to intervene. They don't want to be over contributing to NATO more than most NATO countries are, relative to GDP. And so they just think that we've poured too many resources into this fight, and on that grounds that they want it to end.
Yeah, totally. And I'm reminded of when we were talking about Trump and being an intervenient or non-intravenous and how his actions kind of aren't reflecting that when we were talking about Gaza. So I'm really interested to see how hands-off it's gonna be, or if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's sort of like he's got like two different standards when it comes to those two different conflicts, and it's kind of hard to exactly identify like why he stands where he stands on each of them.
Yeah, and if he's truly trying to like broker a peace deal, those details and what's actually being said and being signed off on definitely matters, like the details within it. And I think it's all a bit vague right now.
Yeah, and Trump, just to reiterate, he basically agreed with what Hegseth was saying, and he was saying that he thought that there would have to be territorial concessions on, I think he said on both sides, like they would have to, Ukraine can't expect to maintain all of its previous boundaries, and Russia is probably going to have to like give up something as well in this to end it. Um,
Yeah,
but
I
I
think he
think,
said that what did he said some land will change hands on both ends. Um, keep going, Colin. Sorry for interrupting.
but so interestingly, I think Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, and Russia, and Putin, obviously, they said that only Trump would be able to bring them both to the table of some kind of a negotiation. So I
Mhm.
find that interesting because obviously the Biden administration for a really long time was trying to bring all these parties together to end this conflict and wasn't able to do so. And so I don't know what it is about Trump that speaks to both Zelensky and Putin that they're now like willing to come together potentially.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially with just again Trump's views on how isolated the US has become within foreign politics in general.
Do you think that it has something to do with like the persona that Trump exudes? Like, do you
Like
compared to
the
Biden?
power.
Maybe, or I even just think like I think that Zelensky and Putin probably both think that Trump means business, and so that might be a part of the motivation. I mean, I'm sure like they've both seen the footage of Trump getting shot and like standing up and saying like fight, 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 and I wonder if that like image that Trump projects is somehow an advantage to him in brokering peace, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally see that. I think that Trump has a much more powerful image and stronger rhetoric than Biden did. If you compare the two, like him or not, he is a very influential person, and I could see that influence playing a key in um, why they would want to make a peace deal with Trump versus Biden.
I think you could, I don't know, you could almost make the argument that Russia might not have invaded Ukraine if Trump had been president over Biden. Because I just remember, like, I remember so vividly in early 2022, like, starting to hear a bit about, like, oh, they're putting troops along the border, like, maybe they're gonna invade, maybe. And Russia had taken Crimea when Obama was president and kind of like rolled into that territory and just declare themselves like the new leaders there. And so it's interesting to me how like they didn't seize any new territory in Ukraine under Trump. And then obviously they invaded under Biden, and then now they're like willing to come back to the table. So I'm really just like curious about like what about Trump speaks to Putin and vice versa? Because apparently they had a phone call last week as well about this potential peace deal.
Did you see anything about what the phone call was about? Or because I also kind of saw a headline about that, but I didn't really
I
the details.
mostly just heard like that they'd be willing to negotiate, which is a change from the trajectory it's been on.
Yeah, that is interesting. I always wonder too what kind of back channeling there is going on as well, like what the public doesn't know, um, how the communication is behind closed doors and the messaging that's going on there. So that could also play a role in that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's all I got for right now. Oh, other thing, though, Trump, I think, is more willing to give Ukraine like the short end of the stick in this negotiation, whereas Biden was like gonna back Ukraine no matter what. Like, I don't know if you saw, but Trump had requested like 2/3 of their Earth metals or something like this,
Oh
and so
yeah, yeah, I did see that actually.
he was like, no, like that's not gonna be part of this deal. And so I just think Trump is like more willing to make Ukraine kind of upset or like on the losing end of this, you could say.
Yeah, I'm wondering how that would affect if Ukraine is forced to lose some of their land or whatever. I'm wondering how that's going to impact like everyone's view on like Russia's expansionism if that ends up happening, which I hope it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm definitely worried about their history of expanding. Like they've been in previous wars with like Georgia and other countries in that region, and I'm worried that they have this, now pattern of just kind of rolling into countries and taking over land. And so I hope that whatever deal that they can broker, that Russia will at least be sent this strong message of like, this isn't something that you can continue to do. We're not going to tolerate it. And I hope that the war itself has kind of accomplished that in some way, shape, or form, even though it's been really brutal and tragic. I don't know. I'm hoping Russia got some kind of a message out of it. I'm not 100% sure that they did, though.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see what happens, right? We're gonna see this roll out as well, which is a lot of active news stories that we're reporting on too. So maybe we'll touch base again on it in maybe a few
Yeah.
weeks.
So, yeah, some other stuff is also going on with the Department of Defense. Did you see the plane crash in San Diego?
Yes, every time I see something specifically within San Diego, I claim San Diego is like one of my cities, especially because we both went to college there. It definitely feels more real. Not that other plane crashes aren't, but I think when something happens closer to home, I guess, I'm automatically more inclined to engage with it or read about it and feel a little more for it, I guess.
Yeah, so it seems like the plane like crashed into San Diego Bay and the pilots, I think there was two ejected before it crashed, but obviously the plane went down. Reportedly, it was like a $67 million plane with all this like military grade equipment on it, and some fishermen came by and like got the pilots out and they were okay.
Yeah,
But
and no one died in this crash, correct?
yeah, I didn't see anything like that. But
Yeah.
it's strange in the context of we've been talking about all these other plane crashes happening. So what do you think about it? Like, is this a pattern now, or do you just think the media is like more focused on it right now?
I have to, my mind tells me that it's a pattern, but unfortunately, I'm so superstitious about this stuff that I'm like, no, it can't be a pattern. It can't be. Like, I have to tell myself this because I fly a lot. I'm actually going to San Diego next weekend, and I I don't know. I'm wondering too if the media is just reporting on it more, especially since the DC plane crash as well, and that making so much news coverage too. But I can't think about any other notable plane crashes, I guess, unless except the time when we were in Buenos Aires when that was happening. All the stuff with Boeing was happening too.
Right, like the door blew off the Alaska airline
Yeah, that
flight.
was crazy.
Yeah.
What
Well,
do you think?
one of the stranger things I did when we lived in San Diego was I went deep sea fishing and they like drove a little charter boat like 2 miles out and it like our phones thought we were in Mexico and it was crazy. But I'm like when I heard this news story, I tried to imagine like just being out there on like the fishing charter and like a jet just like crashes right into the water. That would have been insane. Like that trip was already insane enough, but it's like something that doesn't happen every day, and yet it's starting to feel like this is happening like every day now, where like another plane is just falling out of the sky. And I'm just curious, like what's going on? Is it the FAA? Is it the DoD? Is it like the Secretary of Transportation? What's going on?
And I was trying to do some research specifically on the San Diego one when I had read the headline on it, and it was kind of just the same things coming up, the same like type of issues coming up for when we reported on the DC plane crash. Like you were naming like is it an FAA thing? Is it like what is happening? Like why is it becoming a more I guess not, I don't want to say normal, but I mean we've only had this podcast since the beginning of the year and we've already reported on, I guess this is our second one. Second.
Well, yeah, second time talking about a plane crash, but like third plane crash. There's
Within
also another one
2025.
in Alaska too, but that was like a private plane. But that went down and I think like 10 people died there. I don't know. I don't know if it's just like this stuff happens and for some reason the media is like dialed in on it right now. Because I know that when we were at the Vista, we did report one time on like a helicopter going down. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that one.
Because there's just a lot of like military activity in the San Diego area. And so one of the helicopters went down like en route to another base. And so we just wrote a little like news blurb about it.
Yeah, again, this is just something that people are begging, searching for answers for because obviously air traffic and travel, a lot of people do. So I really hope it's not a pattern. I really hope it's not this ongoing trend. And I'm glad no one died in this San Diego one too.
Yeah. So I guess so two other headlines related to this story brought my attention because they might hold some answers to like what might be happening. So let me know what you think about this because
Okay.
we had the aircraft carrier, the USS Harry Truman, get into a collision with a merchant ship in the Mediterranean Sea. And that's like the first time a carrier has been implicated in a crash like that since 2004, I read. And then we had Marco Rubio, who's going to Europe for like this Munich conference that they're all having out there. And his plane had to turn around like around, I don't know, I think it was like around New York. He had to turn back around and come back because there was some mechanical issue with his plane. So do you think that either of those headlines might have something to do with what we've been seeing?
Within our questions about whether or not it's a pattern or not.
Yeah, like whether it's a pattern or like who might be responsible for all of these things kind of disintegrating at once.
I I've like hearing those headlines and everything that we've been researching and these stories that we're doing, I have to, my gut instinct tells me that yes, it has to be all connected. But again, I didn't do too much research within that realm. But yeah, I am interested to see somebody speak up on this in terms of the overall overarching pattern or story and connect these things and see something about that. I'd be interested to see that if a reporter's working on that or maybe if the FAA comes out and says something for an overall umbrella message to at least kind of, I guess, calm nerves or appease people or the people like us who are more skeptic and are saying, is this a pattern? Is this going to keep happening? Type thing.
Yeah, because I guess what I had thought from those other stories was like the carrier crash might indicate that something on the DoD's end is going wrong, like their communications with like I don't know each other and like maybe it's something with the Department of Defense. And then the story about Rubio's plane getting turned around made me think like, well, maybe it has something to do more with like the mechanical side of like the planes and also maybe like the FAA or something. Obviously, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, and we'll probably find out more, but I think there's something's going on, whether it's just like the transition into the new presidency, the new cabinet, but I'm just curious what it could be.
Yeah, I'm reminded again of when we were talking about every time there's transition periods, especially within these big, huge, important jobs, there's still a learning curve, but unfortunately, like in things like this, you can't really ma have room for human error. And then I remember we were talking about how, um, in general, there's less and less, I guess, qualified pilots coming into work too. So maybe that could be an issue too, just our access to people who are qualified to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And to speaking of transitions, I think I'm ready to transition to the next topic if you are. This one's a little bit unrelated to the last one, so I just wanted to preface it. But Kanye West and his tweets, his ex
Yeah.
recently.
Um, yeah, like, if anyone keeps up with Kanye at all, I personally don't because I don't like to, because this man is just so mentally ill that I can't even take anything he says seriously. But I want to say it was within the last week or two that he made a bunch of anti-Semitic tweets, one of them all caps saying I'm a Nazi and references to Hitler being Hitler and calling him like Yadolf and stuff like that. Just like very nonsensical things, like the fact like when you say it, it's almost laughable. Um, but that has definitely been trending within the new within our generation. People were talking about it. My friend had actually sent me screenshots of this tweet because I don't have Twitter right now. What do you what do you think about that, Colin? Like Kanye and all these tweets in general?
So I mean, we've seen this before, and you and I were talking about how at the Vista we did write a couple of like reaction pieces about him. I think we did like at least one like news story about like what's going on with him, and we got student reactions, and then we did an opinion piece just about like we don't like someone was saying like I don't agree with what he's doing, and this is we shouldn't be treating him any different than anyone else just because he has mental illness. Which that's I agree with that. I think like he's been diagnosed, I'm pretty sure, with bipolar disorder.
Yeah,
There's a really, like people will go through these periods of like manic, where they aren't really able to regulate themselves. But I would say that this is very, even for like a manic episode, it doesn't really fit the bill. I'm not obviously not a medical doctor in any way, shape, or form, but I'd say like he, I feel like people who have manic episodes don't like suddenly turn anti-Semitic. I feel like there might be something underlying to his worldview that is more like anti-Semitic by nature, and then he's just tweeting it with no inhibition because he might be having mania or something like that.
totally. And just Kanye in general has had this slow decline, or I don't even know if it's been slow, like just this decline since I want to say our childhood days or even our high school days. Like, again, when we were talking about reporting on it in the Vista, like I remember the first time and the only time I wrote a Kanye article, it was our sophomore year. And that was like when I was a baby in the Vista, and the article was absolute trash. I remember the executive team at the time had kind of ripped it apart, and at the time, like my skin also wasn't as thick, so I was like, why don't they like it? But it was more just an opinion versus fact thing. And yeah, I hate that we have to even talk about him right now or that the media has to report on him because he is a public figure. He reminds me in that way of how I feel about Trump when Trump does super, super reactionary things. It's like you have no choice but to report on it. Like at one point within the Vista, we were like, no more Kanye stories, please, guys. We get it. Like he is a nutball, like all this stuff is happening. We have to find, or we would always say, like, let's find a new angle. Like, I think one time somebody had written about like separating the art from the artist, like in regard to like Kanye being like a bad person and like his art being still good. I don't know. And it just gets repetitive.
Yeah, no, and I think that that is an interesting angle to take on it. I don't know. I wonder what you think about that. Like, do you factor in the artist's personal life when you're listening to their stuff, or is it kind of irrelevant, you think?
For me personally, most of the time I'm applying the art to my life. So I think I am able to separate the art from the artist in that way. I don't know. It depends because some artists I feel, I guess, closer to, not to be super parasocial, but like, for example, if I don't know, if, I'm a really big Olivia Rodrigo fan. If Olivia Rodrigo did something so, so horrible, I don't know if I'd be able to look at her music the same. Say that. I don't know.
Didn't you meet Olivia Rodrigo one time?
Yeah, I did meet her, and I
So
met her
that's
at
not a parasocial relationship. That's a step.
Yeah, we're actually like this. I met her once and talked to her, and I also saw her in concert twice. So we're like this. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that, separating the art from the artist? Are you able to do it?
I think so. Like I still listen. I'm not a big Kanye fan anyway, but I do still listen to like the odd song here and there. Like I really like Homecoming recently. I don't know. He's got like a few good ones that are on rotation, but I don't know. I don't think you have to like everything the artist does to endorse their music. there's many other examples of like artists who have really bad allegations against them.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever deliberately, it's more of like if I already know their music, I'll keep it in my playlist, but I'll maybe like change my approach. Like I'm not gonna go seek out more of their music knowing what I know about them. It kind of might deter me more so
That's a
than like
really good point. I think I do that too, actually, now that you say that. Because I'm trying to think about like a time where I've been like, oh gosh, I can't follow this person anymore, whatever, stuff like that. I think about like what happened with Rex Orange County's allegations. I was a really big Rex fan, and then I think after that, I kind of just naturally fell off him, but I still listen to like all his old stuff, like Pony, that whole album. I don't know.
and so it is interesting because to the other extent, sometimes artists will say like they're doing this to destroy my career and I think in Kanye's case, he's completely doing this to himself. Like it's coming from his account. He's the one who's been using this rhetoric and like time and time again. But yeah, I mean,
He's been doing a lot of crazy shit within
yeah,
the media, like with the Grammys and his wife, maybe now ex-wife. I don't know. Maybe
yeah.
they're getting divorced. Bianca, um, and how sh he had her fully nude. And I know that people were saying that they have kind of suspected that Kanye has this humiliation kink with her. And that's really sad to me. I can't even believe she was fully nude, you guys, if you didn't see it. I actually saw it on a TikTok or something like that before it got taken down. It is a fully nude woman, and there were literally children and stuff there, and I couldn't help but think to myself, like, if this was any other event or like not a famous people's event, like she could get charged with some what is it like
Indecent
public,
exposure,
yeah,
maybe
yeah, and can't you get charged as like
a
sorry,
predator or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, like a predator or something like that if you are publicly exposed like that? Like children probably saw that. I don't know where they were in the crowd, but that's horrible to me.
I mean, if they are headed for a divorce, which I also saw a bunch of headlines saying or implying that, I don't know if it's true or not, but allegedly they're heading for divorce. It probably could have something to do with that whole like exchange and public appearance because like it seems like he might have encouraged her to do that because it would draw all this publicity. And obviously, if you're married to someone and they're like parading you around like that, that's not gonna be a good relationship. That like that's
Yeah.
not a very good starting place for the relationship. Okay, so we were talking about Kanye West and his kind of ongoing situation, maybe getting a divorce from his wife, Bianca. Um, do you think that in any way this is reflective of like a growing trend of anti-Semitism, or do you just think that it's one person having like a psychotic episode?
Um, Honestly, it could be both. I again like what you were saying about when people with or when somebody is manic, I don't know how much like I don't know if they could just automatically become like anti-Semitic. So I think definitely Kanye has some underlying feelings about this for sure. Like there has to be some type of maybe truth or maybe like some type of like, his shadow self coming out there or something like that. But maybe, yeah, maybe it's just for me, I view it as a combination of both. More so the crazy thing, but definitely I could see it trickle into both.
Yeah, it reminded me of like this kind of shocking statistic or poll I saw back when we were at USD and they had Fizz, which we've already talked about, was like this anonymous platform that the students could engage with. And I remember in like January of 2024 seeing this anonymous poll. It just said like, are you anti-Semitic? And people could vote yes or no. And like 75% of the respondents said yes. And I think it was like 991 people. Okay, I remember because I screenshotted it and I referred back to it in preparation for this. Just because I think that that was pretty shocking. Like within 14 hours, 75% of people were saying like yes, they were anti-Semitic. And in that case, it was very low stakes because it was anonymous, supposedly. And that was really troubling. That was before then, like that whole spring, we saw a lot of encampments on different campuses, and it just seemed like the tide was turning against Israel in like the PR war that was happening that whole time. And I was worried that like in people's animosity toward Israel for the way that they were conducting themselves in the war was somehow like translating into just blatant anti-Semitism that people were pretty comfortable expressing, if you will. And so it makes me nervous that like anytime there's a high profile person like Kanye who's like spouting this publicly, that it is going to rub off on these impressionable younger people.
I have to also tell myself something like Kanye is very obviously crazy. I have to try to have faith in just humans and humanity as in general in our society and be like, okay, obviously this dude is crazy, but yeah, that is a really good point. Like with a high profile public facing figure, if they're comfortable enough to be saying stuff like this, then I'm sure there are going to be followers being like, yeah, I mean, Kanye said it, so like I can too. And with social media, people are so comfortable with saying their opinions behind closed or not behind closed doors, but like behind the screen,
Mhm.
especially with something like Fizz. That was a whole issue with Fizz too. And I didn't see that poll, but that is really, really disheartening that that poll came directly from our community too.
And I think that Kanye has lost a lot of credibility. Like he might still have people who look up to him. I don't really know anyone personally who like takes what he says as like gospel or even remotely legitimate. So, you know, but also I wanted to bring in Candace Owens has been friends with Kanye for a long time and spoken like pretty highly of him, thinks that he's like a genius and all this. And I was looking for like her to comment and say like what he's saying is clearly a result of like a psychotic episode, but I didn't really see anything from her. I know because we talk about her kind of frequently on the show with her coverage of like Baldoni versus Lively, and she's really been popping off with that. She's also been popping off with this new series, Becoming Brigitte, which has been blowing up in a major way. So I wanted to ask you if you've seen that at all, and if you think
Yeah.
that like she should be commenting about Yay.
Candace Owens is definitely a very smart woman. Even if I don't always agree with her politics and her beliefs. I definitely think she's not commenting on it for a reason, whether it just be that she wants to not comment on her friend being a bad person, or whether it be that she doesn't want to open the door that her credibility could have been wrong about him. But in regards to the new series that you just mentioned, I only listened to the first episode of it too. Um, but what about you? What do you think she should be saying about Kanye and what she should be doing?
Well, I mean, she also has this kind of streak of being labeled as anti-Semitic, but not for the same reasons as Kanye. Like, I think for her, a lot of it stems from she's very angry about, again, the war between Israel and Hamas, and she's very much like calling out Israel a lot with the ways that they've conducted themselves in the war. And so that kind of has attracted a lot of heat. And then she has this way of like escalating it as opposed to she doesn't need to necessarily walk it back, but you can conduct yourself publicly in a way that's not continuing to escalate tensions, and that's not how she operates at all. So she attracted a lot of animosity from like the Jewish community, and then she just like fed into it, fed into it, fed into it, got labeled anti-Semite of the year last year, and even like leaned into that. So yeah, I think she's definitely an instigator. I do listen to her show just because I feel like there's like this sense of like morbid curiosity with her that she
Totally.
she feeds into it, and I occasionally like find myself tuning in, and actually a lot of my friends listen to her too, whether they're left or right, and I think it's interesting. Whatever she's managing to capture in people's attention right now is very fascinating to me. Even though I completely agree with you, like I definitely don't agree with everything she says, and I definitely think that she's an instigator, and I factor that in to everything she does.
She definitely is more searching for people's reactions. I think in one of our past episodes, we mentioned how she's kind of been blowing up on social media, specifically TikTok, with her Baldoni lively coverage. People are super into that, and it also opens the door for people to get into her new series, Becoming Brigitte, because I saw so many comments and like literally thousands, like tens of thousands being like, Candace, you're so good at covering all this stuff, like blah 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 blah. And she had like responded to one of them, or maybe she had plugged it near the end of her one of her Baldoni Lively coverages and was like, okay, but guys, listen to my new series. And that is totally honestly from a business perspective, a very smart move, but I definitely think she's doing that on purpose.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily want to get into all the weeds of her new series Becoming Brigitte, but it is relevant because she's reaching a lot of people. So I feel like if we're going to be covering like the latest developments and stuff, it is trending right now. For instance, like JD Vance is over in Europe. He went to this Munich conference and then he met with President Macron, and he took a picture with like Brigitte and Usha and Emmanuel and him. And people, all the comments on this post, I think it was posted by Vance, were like if you've been following Candace, like Brigitte, Mr. and Mr. Macron, like they're just she has planted this idea now that Brigitte Macron was born a man. She says his name was like John Michel Trogneau, that it was Brigitte Trogneau's brother, and then at some point Brigitte left the picture and John Michel became Brigitte, basically. That's the story that she's putting forward based off of the research of this other investigator, Xavier Poussard, who I think is French. And they like put out a book together, and then she's been doing this series to bring that work to like podcast form. And I don't know. Again, I have a morbid curiosity about it. I think there's like this huge age gap between the two of them, where like Brigitte was like 39 years old when she met Emmanuel, who was 15. And so that on its face is very like unsightly. Like it's just kind of uncouth. Like there's something about it that
Yeah.
doesn't fit right. And so I think it makes sense that like people are scrutinizing it, but is she potentially injecting like more layers onto it than there really is?
I personally think yes. I only listened to the first episode and like honestly barely because while I do like a good conspiracy here and there, I also can't help but think to myself how harmful it is to spread information like this, even if it is like a conspiracy. I mean, obviously she has so many listeners. I think it's very harmful to do something like this with like little to no evidence, basically. And it really just I could only imagine that it's like ruining the life of Brigitte. Like, I can't imagine like being a public facing figure and then all these people kind of attacking me for being trans when you're not. But also in my mind, I'm like, but why does it really matter that much? Like, I'm like, okay, if she were transgender, I just can't see why that would matter other than the fact that you're outing a trans person and opening the door for harassment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally see that and totally agree with it. And like I think Candace Owens is really staking her entire reputation and career on this as well. And so there's something like kind of exhilarating about watching someone else do that, like go all in on something that is really like, if true, would be one of the craziest investigative stories that I can ever remember. But if wrong and if false, like she's really maligned someone for what? Like for her own aggrandizement? Like, obviously all of what she's saying is like she's kind of like blown past the allegation point. Like she is declaring it as fact. And when I listen to her episodes, when I listen to her commentary, I think to myself, like, that could be a lawsuit, that could be a lawsuit, that could be because like things that she just isn't careful, in my view, in my opinion. She isn't very careful. And some of the threads, like she'll like pull out a strand, but then it doesn't really like loop back, or like she won't be super linear about it, and not all of the threads that she's pulling out are actually like relevant, and it feels like this like method that she has of just like spewing until something like a narrative emerges. And to me, like that's not really how journalism works. Like you have to know for a fact like the entire story before you can adequately present it to the public for their consumption or like understanding.
Yes, and especially something that is so damning to one person. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
even if even if Candace Owens came out and was like, I was wrong, this will follow Brigitte forever. And I think that is so not right. It's not good journalism. I think it is spreading wildfire information for no reason other than just to get reactions, to get likes, and to, yeah, again, cause that reactionary flame, like how we know Candace Owens likes to do. And I I think that she pulled in a lot of people with her Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni coverage, especially people on the left, surprisingly. People were like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like Candace Owens is actually doing something that isn't crazy." But then she turns around and does something like this, and all these new viewers and listeners are like, "Wait a second, what is going on here?" You know what I'm saying? Like it is just so harmful. And I know that, or I read that Brigitte actually had sued somebody for libel back in, I think, 2017,
Mhm.
um, for the same kind of transvestigation, which is a term that GLAAD had coined for the claim that an investigation that cisgender people are trans, which isn't an unheard of thing. Like this happened to Melania Trump and Madonna and other public facing people too. And even when the evidence of these people being cisgender come out, people are still sending them hate, like calling them slurs or telling them that they need to go back to their original gender, which isn't even true. So it just makes me think to myself that even transgender hate spreads to like people who aren't trans as well. Like this is just evidence to me that people are so hateful towards trans people that it literally spreads to people who aren't and affects people outside the community as well.
Yeah, and also like it kind of going back to Kanye and the anti-Semitism a little bit, I feel like it's indicative of this worldview of like there must be one group of people who's responsible for all of the world's ills. And like anytime I see that, I get very agitated because it kind of goes back to like what we were talking about too with like immigration and this idea of scapegoating. Like people are looking at different communities of people around the world and they're saying like they're the ones solely responsible for everything wrong, like whether that be immigrants, whether that be Jews, whether that be trans people. It's like you can't just identify like it's not like all the world ills could even possibly come from one group if they wanted to, let alone the facts actually supporting that somehow. It just doesn't add up. And I think that scapegoating is a psychological defense mechanism about people who feel very out of control of their own life, and so they want to be able to like blame and point to and say like, yeah, they're the problem. And it's very infantile. It's it's oftentimes completely not based in fact. It's just a reaction. And I hate that personally. Whoever it's directed at, I don't really care.
I hate that too and totally agree. And we see it time and time again. Like you just named so many different groups that this has happened to. And when it comes out that it just keeps happening to different groups too, and people are like, we saw this happen with this previous group and this and that, and people are like, no, it's different until it keeps just repeating again and again. And I think that's so unfortunate and so,
I
yeah,
feel
I
like
just,
Gen Z can do better. Like, there's no reason we're not intelligent enough to see scapegoating when it's happening and not recognize it and not call it out, let alone like engage in it ourselves. It just seems like this very like old school way of viewing the world of like absolutes of good and evil and we're good and they're evil. Like, it's just like dumb. Like, can we just all agree that humanity is very nuanced and each human has the capacity for good and bad and I don't know. I get very incensed about it because not only does Candace Owens engage in a lot of scapegoating and Kanye, but also Donald Trump is pretty notorious for viewing the world in those absolutes and categories, and I hate it.
and it's so scary to think that these public figures are so easily able to do it because they have so much influence, whether we like it or not. I think that a common theme within our podcast is how we're talking about people's rhetoric and the influence that they have over other groups of people. So when you see these successful, mature, quote unquote mature, like professionals engage in this behavior, it only it's only a matter of time until it trickles down, which is again unfortunate. And I have to also believe, like, yes, we as a generation need to be smarter than this and view it as a nuanced topic. But sometimes I don't think we are because of things I see on social media. Even outside of just this topic, I feel like our generation has trouble sometimes viewing things with nuance, and that's also where like cancel culture comes from as well. Like it's that black and white, like you're bad, you're good, two category thing when it that's just not the case.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think the probably the best thing I learned in college in the whole time was to recognize ego defense mechanisms, what they are, what they look like, and like where they come from. I wish that that was common knowledge, and hopefully I'll try to like sprinkle that in here and there in our podcast. We talked about scapegoating. Maybe we'll get to some of the other ones when they pop up. But yeah, that was some of the most valuable stuff I've ever learned in my life. So
And I mean, I've gotten to hear you talk about it too and pick your brain about that stuff too. So, I mean, if we can talk about it on this podcast and get to pick your brain about it, like I would love to as well. And I know, I just feel like a lot of people would like to listen to stuff like this too.
yeah. Okay. Do you want to move on to what's going on with Trump's executive orders making their way through the court and just various lawsuits that have popped up to stop it?
So basically, with Trump's executive orders and everything that's been happening, in that regard, there have been people and there have been lawsuits against Trump's EOs kind of going around, and the surge of lawsuits against Trump's EOs include some things like his challenge to birthright citizenship, which I haven't fully been updated on the kind of more niche details of that there. But I wanted to talk about this term of constitutional crisis that's been kind of trending in regard to Trump's EOs. The left has been saying more of the left people have been saying things like, oh, like this is not constitutional. This is a constitutional crisis when it comes to the power that um, Trump has, his executive overreach, and like what he is allowed to do and what he isn't allowed to do. Versus, I feel like the right side has kind of been saying more things like, oh, this isn't a constitutional issue or anything like that. Like, I've been seeing comments about how they're just like, oh, people don't know how executive orders work. Like he's the president, he's allowed to do these things. But I think that these surge in lawsuits show us that there is a constitutional issue here. Like it illustrates that there is the that the judiciary's role is to maintain these kind of like constitutional limits. So we'll have to see what is happening within that and what the Supreme Court has to say about that as well. What are your opinions about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's at stake or what's at issue is just this idea of like separation of powers. So, like you were saying, obviously executive, legislative, judicial, and they're supposed to kind of keep each other in check. And Trump wants to amass as much power to the executive as he possibly can. We've sort of been trending in that direction over the course of many past presidencies, just with like executive orders becoming the way of um, essentially creating new law out of thin air. And historically, obviously, the Congress was supposed to be the ones legislating, passing laws that the executive would enforce. And I feel like we just lost that somehow. I think that Congress needs to step up and start legislating these things that Trump is putting into his executive orders. Like, if you want to make this the law, it should be passed by both houses of Congress, signed by Trump, and then it can be law. But just the whole idea of executive orders is, to me, kind of a way of circumventing that whole process. And it does erode the intended separation of powers that the Constitution sets up. And so I think the judicial is in a weird position right now where they're having to push back on the executive, but that particular relationship is kind of hard because the executive has the upper hand in terms of enforcement ability.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with everything you just said. I think that also people this has come to a very powerful like people are realizing it more within Trump, but I have to say that there has been an increase in that executive power from both parties, and the only way to be able to solve this is, like you said, strengthening legislative action and um increasing bipartisan cooperation, enabled so that we're able to prevent constitutional crises. I, it's interesting to me to see all of Trump's EOs when I think that Trump is doing all these like very rapid like EOs and stuff like that, knowing that obviously these things will be challenged, like with the lawsuits and stuff like that. Like I think that he, again, like I keep saying, like he's a reactionary person. He's kind of doing this thing to like almost create chaos, and I definitely think it's a strategy of his to be able to do that. And I whether or not it works, I still think it raises concerns from us and from other people about how much power the executive has, and if his rapid EOs and everything that he's doing is kind of undermining that democratic process.
yeah, the word that I keep hearing thrown around that speaks to what you're saying is people are saying like flooding the zone. I think that was a Steve Bannon term that he coined, but essentially it's just this idea of like overwhelming people with the sheer amount of like chaos and like change that he's trying to instigate all at once. And I think you and I both experienced that in Trump's first week, where like the first week we had a report on his EOs, were like, oh my God, like there's so much. How do we get to all of it? And I think a lot of the news media has been feeling that as well, but just kind of feeling overwhelmed and like stuff it must be slipping through the cracks that like is getting past people, but there's so much other stuff to cover that even like it's not even I don't like how much are we not catching is I guess my point. But I think that's all intentional and deliberate to your point.
Yeah, I'm always thinking about that when it comes to Trump specifically because he's obviously very an outspoken person. And again, we always talk about his rhetoric, like that is just his thing to exude this power, this influence, and doing these EOs over and over again and kind of, again, like flooding the zone, the strategy is I can't help but think about the in-betweens, like what you were just saying about what is passing, like how can the media possibly keep up with all of this and how could people possibly keep up with all of this? Like when we were recording that initial episode, I remember thinking to myself, do I sound super robotic right now because I didn't want to get anything wrong or
Mhm.
miss anything because there was just so much within his first week of presidency and still so much is happening.
Yeah, no, it was like a whole laundry list of things. And we even like we're very we I think we have like a disclaimer like this can't possibly cover all of it in one episode, and that's been the pace that he's been going at and will probably keep going at. So yeah, it's a little alarming, but I don't know. I also I listened to the dailies talking about this constitutional crisis is what they were calling it, and I thought that they had an interesting quote from Andrew Jackson, who I guess had said that the Chief Justice has made his decision and now let him enforce it. And it's just, again, going back to the idea of the separation of powers, the balance of power. We've had other executives who were trying to kind of do similar things as Trump. And so I don't think this is like a completely unknown situation. I don't know if it would qualify as like a true crisis, but we do need to be very vigilant, I would say, of the strategy of flooding the zone and how that might be um, letting things slide through.
Totally. And I listened to Ezra Klein's podcast about um, kind of this constitutional crisis as well. And he interviewed somebody who had a lot of knowledge on the Constitution, but also agrees with Trump's policies. And at some points in the interview, I didn't like what he said. Not Ezra, Yuval Levin is his name, about Trump's policies. But I also had some friends who don't keep up with the news as much as me, but are definitely left-leaning who listened to it. And they really liked it and had more of an understanding of the the three branches and how each of the three branches are supposed to follow, are supposed to keep up with each other and are supposed to have checks on one another. And sometimes when somebody asks me and something like, how do you feel about the power of the executive order? Like, is it becoming too much? Is Trump's power becoming too much? I don't really know what to say to them other than the fact that sometimes I think that we have to have a little bit of faith in how our government works. Like, I think that there's a balance between skepticism and trusting that our government is still a republic and it still works within the legislative, judicial, and executive branch. Like it has to, like we have to have faith in the rule of law and that these things, if it isn't constitutional, won't pass in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I I'd say I tend to have a lot of faith in the system, even though there's certainly reason not to, but I tend more toward that side. And so I think the Daily was saying like one strategy would be the Supreme Court making a very definitive ruling against Trump in a very public way, but doing it on an issue that like he wouldn't be able to defy them. So like they specifically brought up birthright citizenship being a good option because they can Trump is trying to do away with birthright citizenship, which is guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. So if the Supreme Court like struck his order down, he wouldn't really be able to do much about it, and it would kind of be a good way of the Supreme Court asserting itself. So I think it might take something like that to reestablish like the balance of power.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they wouldn't do that if that gets to, you know what I'm saying? Like if
Hmm.
they allow that to happen, then that is just a complete disruption of the system. For me too, when you said that you tend to have more faith in the system, I have to say that I think I do too. I just have to. Like I have to have faith in the system for us to function because if people suddenly all decided that the system is not reliable or they don't believe in it, then what does that say about our republic? Like what does that say about how America functions as a society? Like it just wouldn't a part of the system working is the fact that we have faith in it.
Yeah, yeah, I feel that. And speaking of faith in the system, I wanted to maybe move on to the next topic. We had the Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Head of Health and Human Services. So, do you have any thoughts on those confirmations?
I know that I'm interested to see mostly what Tulsi Gabbard is going to be doing, honestly. I think that her story is like really interesting from being like going from Democrat to Republican. And I know that there's like a lot of criticism over her lack of intelligence experience and also like kind of different ties to past foreign leaders. But on the broader scale, I guess that I'm just concerned about maybe like the impact on public health and national security policies for both of them being confirmed.
Yeah, and the reason I was tying it into like the faith in the system thing is because I think that both Gabbard and RFK Jr. speak to different segments of the American population, and those particular apparatuses, HHS and national intelligence, have lost a lot of credibility among Americans who have lost faith in those institutions. And I think the hope of a lot of people is that Gabbard and RFK Jr. will be kind of uniquely positioned to restore that faith in those institutions. Now, I've like been pretty optimistic about that, but I've kind of turned a little bit in how I view RFK Jr. recently. So, I don't know. I used to think like he would restore confidence in health and human services, and that would be great. Now I'm a little bit more skeptical after reading Ask Not, The Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed by Maureen Callahan. I view him a little differently. I think that the whole Kennedy family has this pattern of not treating the women in their lives very well, and that kind of extends to RFK Jr. I'll probably just skip over the details of it, but you should totally check out that book if you have the opportunity. And I would just say that it changed my perspective on him as a figure, what he stands for and represents.
Okay, yeah, I want to check that out. I think I'm gonna probably download it or something like that for my next audiobook that I listen to during my work days. Do you have anything else you want to talk about for their confirmations before we move on?
No, I'm good for now. We're also running down on time a little bit,
Oh,
so
just
can
noticed that.
we can keep going. Maybe we'll do the press conference with Elon Musk in the Oval Office last Tuesday. What did you think of that?
Oh my gosh, I actually saw this trending everywhere, and people who don't even really keep up with politics were talking about it to me. I saw Jimmy Fallon's like spiff on it. He had like a kid on his shoulders and like came in when he was to the show and stuff. And I have nothing to say about this besides the fact that I mean, you listener, you our listeners like know that how I feel about Trump and how I feel about his tech bro billionaire besties. Like I just think that it's just a reflection of this oligarchic nature that I just don't like. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, people were talking about the optics of it, of like Trump was sitting at the desk and Elon was in the room with his son, and they were both kind of like fielding questions from the press, and how like Trump seemed like the one in control of the situation, but obviously people have been trying to pit Trump and Musk against each other, saying that like, oh, Elon is like co-president or something, and I think that it's mostly petty. Like it's kind of the media trying to like hit a nerve with Trump because they know that he wants to seem like the authority in the room. And if they can somehow undermine that with Musk, then it's like kill two birds with one stone for the media. So I don't really buy into it, but I do think the optics of this press conference were a little weird. Having
So
like
weird. Did
having
you see
there and
what the kid was saying, like during the conference or something? That's the part that has been trending a lot. This kid, Elon's kid, was like saying stuff like shh to Trump and being like, "You're not the president" and stuff like
oh
that.
really?
Yeah, like that's what's trending. Like this
Oh,
kid,
I
and
didn't see that.
all these comments are saying stuff like, obviously, this kid is hearing it from somewhere. Like, where is he hearing it from? Because this is a child. Like, how is he coming up with this stuff? And I just thought that was crazy and interesting. I'm like, what is happening there?
I did not see that at all, but that is interesting.
I'll
Um,
send it to you after we're done recording.
okay. I do wonder, like, do you think Musk is gonna last in this role, or do you think it's kind of already a wedge is being driven?
I think that even if a wedge is trying to be driven by, say, the media or like the outside sources, that um I think that he will last just because of the power that he has, and you know that Trump loves power.
So you think like Trump likes having Musk around because of the proximity of it, and so it's like even if Musk is kind of taking the lead at times, it seems it reflects back on Trump.
Yes, I think that the two of them are definitely feeding off of each other, and I think that they're smarter than what people come off to be. Like, I don't think that they'll let this wedge happen, especially when they always discredit the media in general, anyways.
So we were talking about Elon Musk, but now we're going to talk about Trump banning the penny. Did you see that headline?
Yeah, I did. What are your thoughts on the penny being banned?
It's kind of a ridiculous story,
Yeah.
but also in a practical sense, it makes sense. No pun intended, because I heard that it costs 3 cents to make a penny, but obviously it only is worth like 1 cent in terms of value that we assign to it. So it just was like losing us a lot of money. And I've heard people talk about banning the penny for a while, but I mean, kind of like other stuff that Trump is doing right now, like he's actually putting it into action and doing it.
Yeah, I don't have that many thoughts on it other than like I also kind of thought I was silly, but in my mind I'm like, okay, well, change and paper money is bound to become existent at or non-existent at one point. Hopefully not in our lifetime, because I like
I
carrying
would be
change.
surprised, but yeah.
I like carrying cash around sometimes, but like I just was like, this is so silly. But I think it makes sense that like obviously at one point this stuff will become um not relevant.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I feel like the penny has like a cultural value to it. Like, obviously, it's been around for a long time. I mean, I kind of collect like old coins and I have pennies from like the 30s and 40s. And it's weird to think that like our great grandparents were using pennies and now they're just going to be phased out. But it makes sense from a practical standpoint why. Um, but it did make me wonder, like, are we just gonna like round up to the nearest nickel now? And like, I don't know how that's gonna happen.
I don't, yeah, I used to work at like in restaurant jobs and stuff like that too, and when people were like missing a couple cents, I would just be like, I don't care. Like, and my boss would literally tell us that too. It's like it's just a penny. So there's that little anecdote. I don't know if if the rest of the world feels that way, but I feel like at a lot of businesses like that, people are like, if it's a penny or two short, like it's just a couple cents.
I think who's on our currency kind of matters. Like, I don't love that Andrew Jackson's on the $20 bill. I think we could replace it with someone more like deserving. I've said like Harriet Tubman would be a good replacement for Jackson. And similarly, like if they're gonna get rid of Lincoln off of a coin, they should put him on a different one.
If Harriet Tubman was on the $20 bill, I can imagine so many people being angry about that for like literally no reason. The people who like would not care about it at all would be angry about it. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like I could see that being such a story and like such like a oh, people are breaking tradition, stuff like that. Like it's always been Andrew Jackson, like blah blah blah. When like in actuality, I bet so many Americans can't name who's on the $20 bill.
Yeah, I mean, like Andrew Jackson, I just don't think is a very deserving politician from our past. And also, like, the reason it would be like spun up is because it would be politicized. But to me, it's not even like a political argument. Like, I think objectively that there was more interesting Americans than Jackson, Harriet Tubman being one of them. So that's just like obviously a personal opinion, but yeah, it would be like sort of like what's happening with the penny potentially. Like it just is like another needlessly politicized thing. Um, yeah, we'll see how Americans react to this change. No, intended.
That's a good one. Okay. Shall we just talk about our next topic now, our next
Yeah,
bonus topic?
yeah. Our last one for this episode.
Yes. Trump is bringing back plastic straws. So, yeah, he is banning the paper straw from what federal use, and then he has like a plan to ban it within the rest of the states as well, is I think what it was.
I honestly don't know the details at all. I just saw him like he's doing this thing where he like records himself signing the executive orders and he has someone like read it off to him like what he's signing as he's signing it. And so he makes these like very theatrical performances out of signing the executive order. And this one was kind of funny just objectively because
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh, we hate the paper straw. It doesn't work, and it like falls apart. It's like we need to bring back." I don't know. He does it in a comedic way that I actually do think is like funny, but I don't know. Do you? I know that you're very much into the environmental issues, so I was wondering if you had thoughts about it.
Um, yes, I am into environmental issues, but when I first saw the headline, I was literally like, who cares? Um, just because like there is just so many more bigger issues than banning paper straws. I mean, I'm not a fan of paper straws either, but like there's other options that aren't plastic and aren't paper as well, like the biodegradable straws that we had like aromas. Like I like those straws. Those are good straws to me. And metal straws. I used to carry around metal straws places. When I don't have to use straws, I'm just anti-straw in general.
Me too, honestly.
Like I won't even lie, like even at restaurants, and I've worked in the restaurant industry, like, and I still trust to drink just straight out of my cup. Like I just like am not a straw person. So I just didn't care.
Yeah, I agree. Like people, okay. So when I moved to California, that was one of the biggest culture shocks was like they only use paper straws out there. And the first time I like used one, I was like, what the hell is this? Like it does like it comes apart in your mouth. It's weird. It doesn't taste right. There's so
I'm
many
not a
wrong
yeah.
with it. It doesn't like yeah, no, not a fan of paper straws. But I would just as soon not use a straw at all than like make a big fuss out of it must be plastic.
I agree with that.
So to me, like people who get really bent out of shape over these things are just kind of like, I don't know, a little bit pathetic if I'm being honest.
I so agree with this take. I'm glad we have the same opinion about this because I'm just like I just can't help but think to myself, there are just so many more bigger issues in this. There are better environmental issues to focus on, like when the whole surgence of like anti-paper plastic straws happen, like save the turtles type thing. I I kind of think it's funny that that is like now a little bit of a meme, like because it's like there are just such bigger issues in this.
I
And
think Gen
Trump,
Z,
yeah,
yeah.
Trump
No,
doing this is to me is just like his little like stab punch at like just trying to get back at Biden slash like woke politics as he says. Like I don't know, it's just so funny to me.
yeah, I think Gen Z is kind of good at like seeing the bigger picture. Like I feel like we're very much aware of the archetype of like the Karen who will go into a restaurant and like be very demanding and be like super disagreeable and super combative with like I don't know, food workers and it's just like people like seeking out conflict for conflict's sake because they want to be miserable and make other people miserable so they feel better about themselves. And like Gen Z just isn't about that, I feel like. And so like when it comes to something as small as a straw, like I would never in a million years have a fuss or even a second thought about it, even if I objectively don't like the paper straws. But yeah, I mean, I think like Trump signing this executive order is like appealing to his segment of his supporters that are like super disagreeable and want to like stick it to anyone and everyone, really.
Yeah, totally.
All
Okay.
right. That's all that I got for this
Yeah,
week.
me too. Do you feel lighter? Do you feel better?
I do. Actually, yeah, I
Okay.
do.
For those of you guys who don't know, it is genuinely 1 a.m. where Colin is right now. So thank you so much, Colin, for being awake for this.
Yeah,
And yeah, I don't have anything else to say as well.
glad we
Uh,
could end on a light note with the straws and the penny.
yeah, I'm always happier when we have like a piece of happy news to end on because I feel like it's better than the alternative.
All right, washed up.
Washed up
Oh.
out.